Welcome everybody to the fourth and final annual State of STEM event. We are really excited to have you here, especially all of the students are in the audience. Who here is from DC? Oh, you can be louder than that. Come on, DC. There we go. Anyone from Virginia? Yeah, okay. Going strong. What about Maryland? Oh. Way to go, Maryland. And I know we have some New Yorkers here. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. Did I miss anyone? Okay, good. Well, we are again thrilled to have you here. This is our favorite event every year, and you've got to experience a lot of the really awesome science that we are doing in the administration already. So we are so thankful to our federal agency partners who came and exhibited. You see all of the awesome 3D printing that NIH is doing at the front of the stage. These air sensors so that folks can do citizen science that the EPA brought, and all sorts of different things from NASA rovers to this great aquaponics lab we have. So thank you so much, and we hope you had a little bit of active learning while you're here and got excited about science. And now you are going to hear from some incredible folks both within our administration and who we think really exemplify everything that we want to promote in science and technology going forward over the next year of the administration. So thank you to everybody who's tuning in online. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to the President's Science Advisor, Dr. John Holdren.
Well, thank you, Faye, and hello, everybody. I'm just delighted to be here. This is, as Faye notes, something that has become an annual tradition, the State of STEM event, the fourth one. Although Faye said it's going to be the last one, I'm not so sure that's true. I think it is such a spectacular event that the next administration, whoever is running it, is quite likely to continue it. At least I hope that's the case. It's clear that you've already had quite an afternoon with some amazing demonstrations, some remarkable discussions, and obviously there's more to come. We're very excited about all the special guests that we have here this afternoon. Today you're going to hear from some of the amazing individuals that the First Lady invited to sit with her in her box at the State of the Union address last night. You will hear from the Office of Science and Technology Policy's own resident astronaut, Alvin Drew. You're going to hear from some scientists who are working in one of the most remote places on the planet, the South Pole. I have to admit, I'm a little bit jealous that I'm going to have to go back to my office after these remarks and do some other things, because I'd rather stay here and listen to these fabulous presentations. But first, I do want to share a couple of thoughts about the connection between the State of the Union, about which President Obama spoke last night, and the state of STEM and STEM education, which is the focus of our conversations this afternoon. One thing the President made clear in his State of the Union address last night, and that in fact he has said repeatedly since he was first elected, is that science, technology, engineering, and math are absolutely essential to our nation's future. He said last night, quote, "That spirit of discovery is in our DNA. We're Thomas Edison and the Wright brothers and George Washington Carver. We're Grace Hopper and Katherine Johnson and Sally Ride." I know you might not recognize all of those names, but you will as you study more deeply in science and technology and engineering and math. These were all pioneers who made immensely important discoveries and advances in their fields. Our country was built on the shoulders of STEM innovators. Many of them we've had here in the White House for various events. In the same chairs that you're sitting in now, there have been Nobel Prize winners, inventors, chief executive officers of the country's biggest technology corporations, astronauts, world-renowned scientists and engineers from every corner in the globe. Whatever chair you're sitting in this room, you can be sure that some very famous scientist or engineer or mathematician or astronaut has sat in that chair before you. But in many ways, you are the most important audience of innovators to have filled those seats. And that's because you represent the future of STEM in this country. And that's why you're here today. You know, many of us here in the White House regularly talk to the media about what the administration is up to, what we're planning for the future, and many of us also spend time interacting with our colleagues in the science and technology communities, as well as the broader public, to make sure they're up to speed on what we're doing, and so that we can continue to benefit from their feedback and input. But you, the students, our future scientists and technologists and mathematicians, are just as deserving of an update on these matters, and we all stand to benefit from hearing your ideas and your questions. So that's what this event is really all about, engaging you in the conversation. As tomorrow's patent holders, problem solvers, app developers, engineers, and explorers of everything from the workings of the brain to Earth's terrestrial and marine ecosystems, to the outer reaches of the solar system and beyond, you, more than anyone, are at the core of President Obama's vision for the future of STEM in America. As the President has said, science, technology, and innovation are not just helpful, but essential to achieving every one of our nation's top goals, from growing the economy and creating jobs, to protecting ourselves from natural and man-made disasters, to developing the new vaccines, drugs, and therapies that will help Americans live longer, healthier lives, to addressing really tough problems like climate change and cybersecurity. Luckily, we have a president who gets it when it comes to the power of science and technology to achieve these ambitious goals, the importance of inspiring students, boys and girls, from all ethnic and economic backgrounds, to delve into the STEM fields, and the need and the importance of providing those young people with the great teaching and mentoring that they deserve. During his time in office, President Obama hosted the first ever White House Maker Fair, bringing some truly amazing gadgets to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, even an 18-foot tall robotic giraffe that walked and talked. He was the first president to hold a White House Science Fair, which is now an annual event. And he said on this topic, and I quote, "As a society, we have to celebrate outstanding work by young people in science at least as much as we celebrate Super Bowl winners." I thought that was a great comment. The President often hosts athletes in the Oval Office, but I can tell you from firsthand experience that nothing lights him up as much as hosting kids who are excelling in science and math and engineering in his office in the White House. We've hosted 2 White House astronomy nights for kids since President Obama took office. It's been a really fun event with telescopes on the South Lawn to look at the moon and the stars, astronauts to talk with, just a terrific event. The President and I and the government's Chief Technology Officer, Megan Smith, from whom you'll hear a little later in the program, and all of the scientists and engineers, mathematicians, and innovators working in this administration know that it's our responsibility not only to help the American people harvest the potential of STEM fields, to address the challenges and opportunities that we face today, but it's also our responsibility to help you, the next generation, develop the STEM skills that you will need to address the challenges and opportunities of tomorrow. You are our partners in this noble enterprise, as are your dedicated teachers, your committed mentors, your supportive parents. I salute you and them. Next up, you're going to hear from a great group of entrepreneurs, innovators, and explorers who are striving to use science and technology to make their communities and this country a better place. So with that, I'll just wrap up and say thank you to all of you in the audience, to those who will be speaking both in the room and by video from Antarctica, for joining us today. Thanks very much, and have fun.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holdren. So now we want to invite up some incredible folks to talk to you about how they got involved in science and math and engineering and technology. So I would love to welcome up our panelists. as well as Natoki Ford from our office, who is doing a lot around how science looks in the media and what a scientist looks like. So come on up, everybody. Round of applause.
Oh, good afternoon. So while we're waiting for our panelists to take their seats, so we heard about where you all are from, so let's get a sense of what grade you're in school. So how many middle schoolers do we have in the room today? Okay, well, you can make noise. You don't have to just raise your hand. Okay, so who's in high school? Woo, okay. And college students? Okay, I wasn't expecting the hand raise, but I appreciate that. The lovely viewers online won't be able to see that, but I can assure you all we have a nice diversity represented here in terms of students from middle school, high school. Oh, our elementary students, let me hear you make some noise. Woo! Okay, my apologies for that oversight on my part. So again, my name is Natoki Ford. I'm a senior policy advisor here at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and we have a fantastic lineup of speakers here to talk to you today about what they're doing in STEM. And so the way I'll run this discussion is I'm just going to briefly run down the name of speakers and the list of speakers, and then I'm going to let them each introduce themselves and tell you a bit more about their journey to what they're doing now and just give you a sense of what they're currently doing. And then I'm going to ask maybe one or two questions of them, and then I'm going to open it up to you all. And so you guys, as you're listening to them speak, definitely make sure you get some questions in mind, because we want to hear your thoughts and we want to know what you would love to ask of this esteemed list speakers that we have here today. So joining us, we have Mark Davis, who is a former NBA player and a small business owner, and probably the tallest person here today as well. We also have joining us Alvin Drew, who is a former astronaut and currently serves as our Assistant Director for Aviation and Space Security at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. So there's Alvin. Also joining us is Oscar Vasquez, who is a veteran, dreamer, and a STEM leader. And then last but certainly not least is Stephanie Santoso, who is a Senior Policy Advisor at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and she leads our making work. So great, so let's start with Mark.
Yes, my name is Mark Davis. I'm president of WDC Solar. We install solar systems here in the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with solar technology, but what happens is we take a solar panel, basically put it out in the sun, and that creates electricity. That's the short version.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. Alvin?
Hi, Alvin Drew. As she said in the introduction, I'm here on loan from NASA as a NASA astronaut, but prior to that, I was in the Air Force, where I did a lot of engineering work as a test pilot, testing new aircraft out there, and then before that I was flying in helicopters in the Air Force as well, where I got to go apply a lot of the science and things I learned in school to some of the modifications and designs we did for special operations helicopter back then. So before that I was at the Air Force Academy, and prior to that I was here in Washington, D.C., where I went to Gonzaga High School and grew up over in the Brooklyn neighborhood, Northeast D.C.
All right, my name is Oscar Vasquez. I'm from Phoenix. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. I guess my call to fame is when I was in high school, a group of us started a robotics club, an underwater robotics club, and we entered a competition competing against universities from all over the country. And one of those universities was MIT. And we actually ended up competing against them in Santa Barbara, and ended up winning from a high school, winning against universities. So thanks to that, I've been was able to pursue a career in engineering, and I got a degree from mechanical engineering from Arizona State University. After that, I joined the military, and I served one tour overseas in Afghanistan. And nowadays, I work for BNSF Railways. I work in a app development team. So I get to program in Java every day.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steph Santoso. I lead the White House's initiative on making. And so Dr. Holdren earlier referenced that the president hosted the first White House Maker Fair in 2014. And he really cares deeply about making it possible for not just students but adults to have access to the tools, technologies, and resources to be able to take your ideas and turn them into reality. So some of the things that you saw today here in the room, the 3D printed models from the National Institute for Health, thinking about the way that maker spaces are making it easier for students to be able to take your ideas and prototype them. That's something that I've always been really interested in. Prior to being at the White House, I was doing research on 3D printing technology, but I always grew up really wanting to make and create things. So I think the first thing that I really loved to make was clothing. And so I really like to sew and have kind of continued to think about the ways to create more of those opportunities for students and families to have access to those opportunities and experiences here at the White House.
Great, thank you all. And also one thing I should add is a little PSA. For those of you who are viewing this via the webcast, please feel free to submit your questions for our panelists or any comments that you might have using the hashtag SoSTEM, so SOSTEM. So please, we would love to hear your thoughts and your questions if you have any. So with that, I would like to actually start by asking Mark a question. So how do you go from being an NBA player to dabbling in the solar industry? So can you talk a little bit more about what spurred that interest to make that transition?
Yes, I can. So playing basketball, once that was finished, we had to begin a professional career. So we ended up eventually in the solar industry. We hear the president talk a lot about climate change and renewable energy. Solar energy is one of the ways that we can combat climate change. Is clean, is green, and so basically that was an easier transition. Once the president started to run and campaign, we understood that there was going to be a substantial amount of resources directed that way. Wanted to get involved and help people, especially people in low-income communities, enjoy the benefits of renewable energy, the jobs that were available. So we have a nice group of engineers on staff that we work with to design these systems to make sure they work properly and to make sure they generate energy for your home, business, whatever use you need, basically.
And how many people would you say you've been able to reach so far? You talked about working with low-income communities.
Right. So we started the program right around 2012, I think it was. We've installed on more than 300 homes in the District of Columbia at this point. So it's a technology that's really being adopted by a lot of municipalities around the country to help combat climate change. We'll be installing on a number of schools here in the district, a total of about 12 megawatts. So that's going to be more than 30 schools. That effort is led by the mayor, of course, and the Department of General Services, a great group of engineers over there who understand how to make this happen. Won an award in Paris recently. So this industry is starting to grow, and we need lots of new young engineers out there to continue to come up with new technology so that we can make this planet a better place for all of us.
Great, thank you. You hear that? We need new engineers to make it happen, so.
Absolutely.
That's your call to action. So, okay, great, thank you so much for that. So next, I'd like to ask Alvin. So first of all, how many of you saw The Martian in the room? Okay, quite a few of you have seen the movie. So we're seeing all these great things that are portraying space exploration and travel. Alvin, you have actually been in space. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like for you, the experience traveling to space?
Okay, so there's two sides to that, and they're very different. One is going into space, and the other one's being in space.
Okay.
Going into space is the e-ticket ride. You know, it's like grabbing a tiger by the tail. You know, those engines start to light up about T-minus 10 seconds. It's like about 10 million subwoofers, just increasing in volume until finally the main engines light and it just shoves you back in your seat, just, you know, like doing more than 100 miles an hour by the time you clear the tower. And you're just on this dragster going straight up. You know, 60 seconds into the flight, you're 50,000 feet in the air, you're doing the speed of sound. A minute later, you're doing more than 5 times the speed of sound, and you're going through 100,000 feet, and these big rockets fall away, and all this fire and flame. And you're watching the sky visibly go from sky blue to dark blue to midnight blue to just black. And you're watching, you can see the earth. I took off from Florida, and by the time you roll over, you can see the earth again. I can see clear up to Hudson Bay in Canada. And then engines cut off, you go from being pressed down into your seat to being weightless. And the crew, if you're a rookie, will turn around and congratulate you on going into space. Being in space is a whole other experience. It is if that was another wild ride with guitars playing in a big drum beat. Being in space is more like the Blue Danube. It's very graceful. It's quiet, except for the fact that if you look out the window, it's moving fast. You're going about 18,000 miles an hour over the Earth's surface. So if you see these nice little things where we're serenely going across the Earth's surface, it doesn't look like that at all. You know, if you're looking out on an airplane right before you land on a runway at an airport, you see the ground rushing by you. That's what it looks like when you're up there, even 250 miles up in space where I was, which is not that far up in space. The other part is living in space, being in zero G. And that takes a little bit of getting used to if you spent your entire life stuck to the ground. If this auditorium were in space in zero G, first off, we wouldn't have any chairs, so you wouldn't need them because you're floating. It's as if imagine if you're in water like diving or skin diving or scuba diving, except there's no water. And so we wouldn't need these chairs here because you're weightless. You would have handrails or foot loops on the ground. You would also have handrails and foot loops on the ceiling because you get to use the entire volume of this room, which makes this room a much bigger place when you're in space. So it's these little tiny craft that we're up there in space, but you don't realize that we have the entire command of that volume in space, and we get to use that. I think I realized that the first day we're out there in front of the galley, and there's my 6 crewmates now. We're like a lane in basketball, and apologies to you. Elbows flying, and people just trying to get their food. And I'm trying to eat, and I got my spoon hit me in my eye and everything. And finally, I had this epiphany. There's a space above us all. We're on the floor there, but it was open. I just did half a flip, landed up on the ceiling, and hooked my legs over top of one of the rods up there, and just ate my meal in peace. And I'm like, welcome to space. So that's what life is like in space.
And one quick follow-up question: how was the food?
The food is really good. We're done from the days of eating like borscht out of toothpaste tubes. That was back in the 60s. Those were the pioneering days. I had things like etouffee and barbecue and steak and sushi and things like that. In fact, one of my crewmates, I think, tacked on 5 pounds in 2 weeks while he was up there in space. So
Oh, wow.
you actually have to watch your diet when you're up there because the food is tempting.
Wow, who knew, right? Great, thank you so much for that. So Oscar, can you tell us a little bit about your current work? So you're a veteran and you're also trained as an engineer. So do you find that you're able to use your experience both as a veteran and an engineer in your day-to-day job with what you're currently doing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of the discipline you get from the military, you still apply it every day. I mean, simple things as getting up at 5 in the morning, right? You know, you need that discipline to do it every day. And then as far as engineering goes, you know, when you go to school for engineering, it just opens up your mind. It prepares you for those questions that you have no answers to. So when it comes to programming, you know, you have a request from someone that you need to program in the computer, and you don't necessarily have the answer to it. So that's the cool part about my job, that you don't have an answer to it, and it's up to you to come up with a solution. And you know, there's many different ways to do that solution, but you know, you always try to pick an elegant solution, and it's a great opportunity to do that. As far as the military, back to that, just having the discipline, the ability to work with anyone that they team you with, it's a great asset. And in the military, when you go to a different unit, a different platoon, or your brothers will be whoever they tell you is your new team, and you will spend so much time with them that eventually they become your brothers, and you are able to work with anyone they pair you with. So that's a great experience, and that's a great advantage to being a veteran in this country. So it's great.
Great, thank you. And actually, one other quick question for you. So you mentioned this awesome opportunity you had as to participate in this competition in high school. And so and you were, if I understand correctly, a part of this documentary, Underwater Dreams?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit more about the competition and just briefly your experience working on that project?
Okay, so pretty much it was my senior year of high school, and our teachers had gone to a summer program in Santa Barbara where they taught them about ROVs, underwater robots. And they came back to school for our senior class, and my teacher told us So here, class, you have an option. You can either do regular book work and go and do research and write reports, or we can do this project and you can build a robot for your senior class. So for us, that was an easy choice. We decided to do the robot because we didn't want to be just reading books every day, right? So we decided to enter this competition. We also decided to enter in a university level. We were in high school, and we didn't want to get beat by other high schools that might enter that competition. So we decided to enter and compete against universities because, well, if university beat us, during high school, we can always say, hey, it was just another university, no big deal. And then if we actually beat one university, which was our whole goal, beat one of them, then we can say we beat a university. So that was part of the reason we did that. The robot, we named them Stinky. And the reason we named them Stinky is because we made them out of PVC pipes. So the piping that you see in your homes underneath the sink, that's kind of the piping that we use to make Stinky. So when you glue that piping together, the glue really smells really bad. Being in a low resource area of Phoenix, the room we had to work with was the size of a coat closet. So it was very small. And that's where we had to put the robot together. So you can imagine how that room smelled after we got done gluing the robot. So one of my teammates noticed that it really stunk in there. So he said, it's really stinky in here. And being in high school, we decided to name the robot Stinky. So we went to the competition. We had a bunch of things go wrong. As once you become an engineer, you'll find out that things go wrong all the time. And when you think you're done, you're really not done yet. So we had a bunch of different challenges we had to solve. And actually, the good thing that we learned, and we also learned this from First Robotics, it's something they call gracious professionalism. Right, so when we were in that competition, we try to share our ideas with everybody else so that everybody could benefit from someone else's idea. And it's different when you go in an industry where people try to keep things a secret. When we were in that competition, people were sharing ideas, so next year's competition could be even better as well. So, think everything went according to plan eventually, and we ended up doing pretty well. So,
Oh, that's amazing.
Yes, and during that, one good thing about that competition is that there was people from industry out there. So guys that were graduating from high school, guys that were in university were able to land some of the jobs from that competition. So, the industry takes notice of those types of competitions. So, and not only are they fun, they can provide you a career or a job, so.
Great, thank you so much. And so, Stephanie, so you talked a little bit earlier about how you got interested in making originally. So can you tell us just a little bit more about why this is so important to get young people involved in this making culture, and even just some of the exciting things that are happening in terms of the maker movement that we are starting to see more of?
Yeah, I think Oscar is the experience that Oscar just described is a great example of what we talk about when we think about bringing more of these sort of hands-on experiences to students and families, both in the classroom and outside the classroom. So Oscar was mentioning, like, your teacher gave you two options, right? It was like, do sort of like book work and sort of the more traditional formal classroom learning, or do something that was more hands-on, more active, and that was really tied to some real-world experience that we were really interested in, which was robotics. And so I think one of the things that is so incredible about having the opportunity to take an idea that you have and then build that out with your hands with any tools or resources that you have is that builds your confidence and your creativity. It creates opportunities for you all to collaborate with your peers. So it was a team effort, I think, on your part with the robotics competition. But it's also this opportunity to really kind of broaden what you're interested in, right? Because with making, you can come at it from really different angles. So for me, I was really interested in sewing, but then I realized that actually there's some really interesting things that you can do with electronics and textiles. And that's how I actually got into programming and doing some wearable electronics, was because I was first interested in fashion. And so I think there's these really great ways for students who have different interests in STEM or arts and design to then broaden their set of skills and apply them to problems that you all care really deeply about. So one of my favorite makers that we actually had at the White House Science Fair last year was a 12-year-old named Lily. And Lily's grandfather actually suffers from Parkinson's disease, which causes tremors. And so it makes it difficult for somebody to do something like grab a cup and be able to drink out of it without spilling. And so she was noticing that her grandfather was having these issues. So she talked to her dad about it, and she said, I think I could actually design something that would help Grandpa. So she actually bought really inexpensive moldable plastic from like Joann's or Michael's or craft store. She sculpted like a really basic prototype of a 3-legged cup, because in school she was learning about how kangaroos have the two feet, and the tail is used for balance, for extra structure. So she made this cup and called it a kangaroo cup. And then she thought, well, let me see if I can sculpt it out of some other material. So she took a class, a sculpting class, a pottery class. She learned how to sculpt to make it out of ceramic. And then she realized, okay, ceramic's not the best material if, it's subject to breaking. So she learned how to 3D model and use a 3D printer to create prototypes. And she started a Kickstarter campaign for her project. And she's actually now selling these cups. So now she's an entrepreneur. So you can kind of see, and she's helping a whole host of individuals who could actually find this particular kangaroo cup really useful. So, but that's only one of a whole number of students. And I bet you all have amazing ideas. You all in the room and out there watching have really amazing ideas. And what making allows is for you to be able to take those ideas, test them out, and actually make them real and bring them to the world.
Great, thank you. So it's making and entrepreneurship seem like they go hand in hand, certainly. So thank you so much for that. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to ask maybe 1 or 2 questions, just general questions for the panelists. But I want to make sure our audience is getting their questions ready. So after I ask these 2 questions, then we're going to open it up to questions from our audience here. So my first question is, so as Faye mentioned at the beginning of this panel, that the work that I'm doing, which is in support of the administration's broader efforts to focus on promoting diversity in STEM careers, we're looking at how role models, both fictional and in real life, and particularly how people are portrayed in the media, can be a real positive reinforcer in terms of helping us attract more diverse talent to the STEM workforce. So with that said, I would like to open it up, and just, this is for anyone who would like to answer, who was your role model growing up, or someone that you looked up to that was an inspiration for you? And it could be a person that you knew in real life, or maybe it was your favorite character that you saw on television. So either way, so anyone's welcome to answer the question.
I would say my grandfather. I was raised by my grandparents, and basically he taught me a self-sustaining lifestyle. So we grew our food, and we recycled whenever we could, and that basically, he's my role model because he really taught me and gave me the foundation as to how I live my life now. I still like to grow, I still like to plant, I still like to make sure I recycle whenever I can. That's very important. When I go through the house, I try and cut off lights, I try and be efficient, and I think a lot of you kids now, your parents are going to be harping on you about the lights. Turn the lights off, because we reduce our energy consumption when we do that. Plant a garden out back if you can. We have a nice facility over here that has demonstrated to us how we could grow our own vegetables. Especially in urban areas, it's very important to be able to eat green vegetables. It might seem like it's a simple thing, but that's a problem in many urban areas, and we have alternatives now where we can grow our food, grow our vegetables. That was my role model, and I think that's really what he gave me, and so that's it.
Great. Anyone else like to share?
I think that at every point in my career, I always had a kind of a different role model that I followed, right? In high school, I had, first off, I was in JROTC, and I had these awesome Vietnam veterans that kind of taught me what it meant to be an American, right? What it meant to be do civil service. And then my teachers that got me into engineering became role models through my whole college career. I mean, they really guided me through whenever I had questions. And I always just wanted to be like them, right? Be able to talk to kids and teach them something and learn, their enjoyment that they had for teaching. I wanted to have that for learning. And I think I embraced that when I was in college, and that really helped me out.
So when I was little, and still to this day, one of the other great loves that I have is marine biology. And so when I was little, I always used to tell my parents that I would be the next female Jacques Cousteau. So for those of you who don't know Jacques Cousteau, he's this underwater explorer and scientist, and he used to host these specials on, I think it was like PBS or something, that would just have this incredible footage of ocean life, and he was so knowledgeable about ocean life and marine life and all of the animals and the mammals, and so I mean I still carry that love of marine biology and marine science today, and it's definitely something that even though I am not a marine biologist, I think it's something that you can continue if you have a love of science as a kid. There are ways to kind of keep that love alive, even if it's not what you do in your day job. And I find that that's actually really true.
Great, sure.
Just like Oscar, I'd say I had different role models, just different guides to every place I was along my way in my journey through life. When I was a kid, our neighbors were huge role models. So I had folks who were they all worked for either the government or they had their own businesses. And I think every kid on my street went to college. They were expected to go off to college. You were supposed to prepare yourself for that and go do that. That was just the norm. And I remember just them, when I was 4 and 5 years old, sitting out, some of my neighbors who would say, learn all your basics. Any knowledge you have is going to take you anywhere you want to go in life. There's no limits. And they were always expressing to me that once you got that, there were no limits there. My parents were also, again, big fans of, no matter what dream I was going to articulate to them, I'm going to be a fireman, I'm going to be an astronaut. There was never a point where they laughed at me and said, you can't do that. They gave me that same gospel, learn what you can, prepare yourself for those things, and go do those things. And then the third part of that was the teachers I had. They were also ones out there who usually, if anything, they were pressing me to go think bigger. Whatever you're after, that's not big enough. Keep pushing yourself even harder. And when I finally left home, I'd gone to the Air Force Academy. I was in the Air Force, and from the military, they take on hard things. So tell them you're not going to do something like become an astronaut because that would be difficult. We'll get you a talking to. These came from the Air Force of people who took on aviation, which was in itself a very dangerous thing back then. They took on the Nazis, and there's a culture of folks and things out there, things that are difficult, all the more reason to go after it and take it on. And so everywhere along the way, there were people who'd been along that trails in front of me who were all too eager to show me how to navigate my way around the obstacles. And that still goes on today. I'm still out there learning from the people out there in front of me.
Great. Thank you all. So with that, I would love to just open it up to our audience for questions now. So if you could just raise your hand if you have a question. I believe we have a microphone that we will pass around. Okay, so it looks like we have a gentleman down here in the front that has a question. Oh, yes, and actually, if we could have you all, just to get people, if anyone else has a question, if you could just form a line in the middle aisle here. So we'll just start getting people ready, and we'll know who's next for questions. So yes, and tell us your name, what school you are from, and then you can ask your question.
All right, my name is Fred, and I'm from Maury Elementary School, and here's some of my classmates and peers. So I have a couple questions. So first for Mr. Varquez. So I saw this trailer for a movie that sounded exactly like your high school story. Was that based off yours?
There is a movie called Spare Parts.
Yeah.
That it follows the story, yes. So if you want to go check it out, it's out there, Spare Parts. And there's also a documentary that goes along with it, Underwater Dreams, that tells the true story. And in that, you can actually see old footage from the competition. So that's pretty cool. And there's the movie Spare Parts also.
Also, Mr. Drew, I have two questions for you. Number one, how did you hold down your food in space? Did you use Velcro or latches or what?
Fortunately, the food we have up there is sticky, so we'll have things like spaghetti. What we don't do things is eat like popcorn and crackers because it's crumbling, it gets in everybody else's hair, and then they stop talking to you.
Okay, great. So we'll come back to you if we have more time at the end. We want to make sure we let everyone have a chance to ask questions. And yes.
Good afternoon, panelists. My name is Denaya Warren McClure, and I'm from Brightwood Education Campus. The words wearable technology caught my attention. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. So wearable technology can mean a whole bunch of different things, but some examples are there's a lot of research being done by scientists and engineers and fashion designers and artists too on how to make textiles more interactive. So one example is that there are now lots of really interesting materials that you can use to make your clothing interactive. So some examples are you can use conductive thread. So it's actually thread that looks like the regular thread that you would use to sew just your regular clothing, but it actually conducts electricity, so you can use that thread to sew on sensors or lights. So one really neat project that I've seen is that there is a designer that's created a skirt, and she's actually programmed it with a tiny microcontroller. It's a tiny computer that you can actually sew into the skirt, and the skirt actually will light up in different patterns based off of the number of people that crowd around the skirt. So it's like socially interactive clothing, which is kind of neat. And other wearable textiles are also include things like thinking about the way that your textiles might be able to do things like keep you cooler in the summer or keep you warmer in the winter. So there's lots of different options. But yep, lots of artists and designers and engineers and scientists are working on that stuff.
And we'll just take one question, sorry. So we have a nice line of people. We'll come back to you if we have time at the end. Thank you.
My name is Max, and I go to St. Bernard's. I'm 10. How should I prepare now for the STEM jobs of the future?
Wow, great question.
I would say start by learning coding. You know, that's a great place to go. And no matter where you go, you're going to be affected by some kind of technology that helps you program. So there's a great website out there called code.org that teaches you the basics of coding.
Anyone else want to add?
So if you're curious about how things work, figure out, stay on top of that. I said you're already years ahead of anybody at this table in terms of being prepared for that future, because you've been living in a lot of that technology that we didn't grow up with. But what's different is you don't necessarily know what's, if you look behind that tablet, what drives that screen, what causes the signals to go to and from it. If you're curious about that, go dig into that. If something piques your curiosity, go follow that trail for as long as you can.
I'm Courtney. I work with Scholastic News. I was wondering, how do you inspire young kids our age to work for the STEM jobs and get interested in it?
Okay, I could take that one. That's a really good question. So I would say that I think one of the things that's really important is to think about a problem or an issue that you care really deeply about, and then think of how you might want to solve that. And I think if you start with something you care a lot about, and maybe find some other peers or classmates or friends that also have a shared interest in that, it might be really interesting to think about the ways you guys could work together to find a solution to that. The other thing that I think growing up is super important is to find a mentor that you look up to, and that might be somebody in your family, it might be somebody at your school, it might even be a slightly older classmate or friend. But I think those are two ideas.
Hello, my name is Finian Powell, and I was wondering, Mr. Drew, what got you started in the astronomical field? What got you started as an astronaut?
Okay, so I really wasn't interested in doing that until I was at least 4.5. After that, I was a little bit focused. first off, I had gone out to what's now BWI, Baltimore Washington International Airport. My dad was on a business trip, and I was sitting there watching the planes coming. We had observation gates back then, kind of dates tells you how old I am. You go out there into the gate and watch the planes come in and go. And this thing was like big as a dinosaur. It was loud. It belched fire and smoke, and it popped a wheelie and left the ground. I'm like, wow, this looks like something fun. So at that point, I said I wanted to be a pilot because I wanted to go out there and pull wheelies on runways every day. And then I think it was about 6 months later, I'm in class, and the principal comes in and pulls out a TV set, and we watch one of the Apollo launches, and I watch this thing go thundering off the pad, and says, "You just wait, we're going to the moon," which I thought was insane. We'd never get to the moon. But by the time we did, I was in a quandary. I asked my dad, and I was like, "Well, what do I do? Should I be a pilot? Should I be an astronaut?" And he goes, "Well, almost all the astronauts are pilots. You can do both those things." And I said, "Well, then I'm set." And he goes, "There's some fine print here. You've got really good grades. If stay out of trouble, and you shouldn't talk back to your parents." And I was like, "Well, how about 2 out of 3?" And so from there it was, and again, back to that other question about how do you get inspired about STEM. I like science, I like technology, I like engineering. Math, not so much. But once I figured out that to do all the things I really wanted to do, math was like this big, giant tool that I could use to go knock those things out. Suddenly I was very interested in math because I knew now why I wanted to go add up apples and barrels and things like that. And so that was my journey.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Burns from Time for Kids magazine. So, Mr. Drew, what do you think the future of space travel will look like?
Oh, that's a good question because it's going to look a lot different for you than it did for me when I was your age. So used to get the question, "Well, how do I grow up to be an astronaut?" And I would say the question you should be asking now of me is, if I want to be a NASA astronaut in the future, what would I do? Because the astronaut population, and NASA astronauts will be a small portion of that. Being an astronaut is going to take by the same kind of skills. You have to not mind flying thundering rockets into the sky. Be okay with the engineering and math because those things are required for going into space. But if you're going to be a NASA astronaut, probably the NASA folks will be flying to places like the moon and Mars and interplanetary destinations by the time you're my age. And the way you're going to join NASA is the same way you become a NASA pilot, by having a long resume of flying with somebody else before you get there. So folks who want to go fly to Mars will have to show NASA their resume of how many thousands of hours they spent in Earth orbit flying for a commercial or private operation before they get there. So it's going to be a very different path to NASA as an astronaut than I took over my lifetime.
Okay, I am from Maryland. I'm in high school, 9th grade. My name is Chiad, and my question is more general. What do you foresee in the future for the STEM program if it continues?
Well, I think the STEM program will definitely continue. I mean, this is the STEM. Before in the old days, it wasn't called STEM, right? But the technology and developing new technologies is what's driven this country to the greatness it is now, right? From the space program that he was mentioning earlier, right? When we got inspired kind of by beating the Russians, right? That kind of inspired a lot of people to work together. Right now I work for the railroad, and the railroad is continuously changing shapes by the technology that we're getting. So the need for engineers, for scientists will continue to go, and it's kind of it's kind of hard to predict what it's exactly going to look like because of the advances in technology that we're getting every day. I mean, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have pictured that I would have all these social media in my pocket, right? Just available anywhere I go. And in some senses, that's made it easier to do a lot of research and increase the amount of technology we develop every day. But, it's kind of hard to predict where we will be, but the need for STEM will continue, and that I can assure you.
I think many of the problems that we have in society today will dictate the path of STEM for tomorrow, as climate change has done for the renewable energy sector today.
Go ahead.
I also see STEM evolving into STEAM, that A being arts and humanities. Honestly, if you have the best idea in the world but you can't communicate it to everybody else, then that idea stays locked up in your head. You have to be able to go and convey that idea out there. And I can tell you the frustration of being an astronaut and seeing things that we weren't evolved to ever go experience, and not having the words to convey that to somebody so I can give them that same experience is very frustrating. We're going to need people who can, I'm not saying you need to be a poet or a musician, although it wouldn't hurt, But if you can at least go out there and put ideas on paper in ways that that get that out there. A lot of what you do in science technology is very intimidating to people because you're learning a new language. Learning math is not different than learning Russian. You just have to learn, there's a concept, but there's also the words, and that puts a lot of people off. Now, if you have people who can convey those concepts without filling sheets up with equations that scare people off, then you've gone a long way. So that A is the next thing that's going to enter STEM, and I think that's where it's going next.
I fully agree, and I would just say one last thing is that I'm super optimistic that STEM fields will become more diverse and will be reflective and look like the room here today. So I'm really optimistic that I think with what the president mentioned in State of the Union yesterday, that we will have that in the next 5-10 years.
Great, thank you all. So just a quick note, I think we're winding down in terms of the time that we have left, so I'm just gonna ask we're gonna take just maybe 2 more questions, and maybe we'll only have 1 answer from each of our panelists, and then super brief, like lightning fast, final thoughts from everyone.
Oh, my name is Nina, and I attend Annapolis Senior High. I am interested in STEM, and college nowadays is very, very expensive. What do you think I should do?
Well, I'm kind of partial to this. One of the ways that you can afford to pay for college, if you can't do it now, it's there is grants out there, but there's also, and I'm partial to this, the military, right? If you join the military, you will come out with the GI Bill, and that will help you pay for college if that's one of the paths you choose to take.
My name is Gabriela Melendez, and I'm from Buffalo, New York, Himmelen Park School 74. I have a question for Mr. Drew. What do you think the cause is of a potato growing in space or microgravity?
What do you think the cause?
Like the cause or what will happen to the potato?
Did you see The Martian? No.
Well, there's a difference between growing in with gravity and growing without, and that's one of the tougher things we've gone out and tackled is, will things grow normally in space? Because animals, we don't think will actually grow correctly. You need gravity to tell you, so your eyeball cells know where to find to go sort themselves out. Plants don't seem to need that. We were able to grow. In fact, I think they just had a big thing a few months ago where astronauts were eating salad from greens they'd grown right there on the space station. So potatoes, things like that, it's good. So if you're a vegetarian and you're in deep space, you're doing good. But if you need to go out there and grow cattle or something like that, you're going to have a tougher time with it.
Thank you so much for that. So really briefly, we are wrapping up now. I would like to give our panelists just an opportunity in 1 sentence just to give either some advice to the students, something that you wish you had known earlier on in your career. And I'll start by just saying, even if something is difficult up front, it doesn't mean that it's not for you. So you should just definitely keep trying if you have an interest in something. So just really brief, 1 sentence, piece of advice or something that you wish you had known earlier in your career that you know now.
Okay, so
1 sentence.
Yeah. Stick with your dreams. Decide what you want to do, what you want to be in life, and hang in there. Stick with it. It's not going to always be easy. You're going to have tough times, and those tough times are going to help build your character and make you a better person. So hang in there.
Faith in your abilities to do what you set out to do. So on top of that, I find that fear is a bigger deterrent to getting things done than lack of knowledge. If you're here already, you've already got the knowledge. It's just going to have faith in your abilities to go carry out what you want to go do in life.
And I would like to say that engineers, scientists, they're just normal people like you. If we can do it, and you can definitely do it too. And most important than all, don't forget to dream. Continue your dream.
And I think for me, I would say that you don't have to choose between STEM and then arts and design. So I think a lot of times sometimes people talk about themselves as being a left-brained person or a right-brained person, but if you love lots of different things, then I think you should continue to do those things, and eventually you'll find a way to marry those together and do something that you really love.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to close with a quote, one of my favorite quotes. I received this in a frame when I was in high school, and it's by Eleanor Roosevelt, and it says, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." So thank you to our wonderful audience for your great questions for our panelists, and let's give our panelists a round of applause.